Hello dear learners, welcome back to another interesting session of Residential Design Lecture Series. I am Architect Mansha Samreen from School of Architecture and Design, K.R. Mangalam University, and today I will be transitioning you into the world of doing concepts, zoning and schematic planning in the residential lectures. So, concept, translation, zoning and schematic planning in a residential design is an essential part right after understanding all the basics of residential design, which we have already discussed in the previous lectures. Residential design moves from understanding of basics of design processes discussed till now to the point of decision making. This lecture will focus on converting analysis into spatial organization with emphasis on how ideas become plans and into a drawing and into a reality space. So, what is concept translation in design? A design concept is an organizing idea. Concept translation means converting analysis into a spatial logic. It guides zoning, circulation and the spatial hierarchy existing in a design. So, architectural design concept is an important aspect of any design journey and a process. So, why is it important? So, it is first pertinent for the learners to understand what a concept is not. A concept is not a site typology. A concept is not the brief given by the users and not the programming or the area formulation. A concept is not a material technology. A concept is not formal design element. A concept are not the principles and the collaboration that is happening in a design process. So, you might be thinking, then what is concept? So, architectural design concept is the essence of the project. It is what ties everything together. It is the experience, the emotion, the quality and the characteristics people immediately identify when they enter into a structure or a space. So, for a home, a concept is an idea about space, structure, inhabitation and human experience. So, architectural design concept is an idea about the space, structure, inhabitation and the experience. It's the essence of the project. So, you might be thinking, what are the sources for these concepts? So, the sources and the ideas for these concepts will come from the existing site conditions, which you will be analyzing in the site analysis step. The climate, the sun, the wind and the thermal comfort required. The user profile, maybe the family age, type, lifestyle, what is the need of the user, that also gives an idea of the concept, and the overall desired spatial experiences, what type of area the person desires for his home. So, sources for these residential design concepts will come from site condition, that means what is the orientation, how much slope and the surrounding is coming, what the climate is, what is the sun path, wind direction and overall thermal comfort required, what type of user profiles we are dealing with, what is the family size, how many people are there in the family, what are the age groups for the kids, how many elderlies, depending upon the people who are going to inhabit the house. So, desired spatial experience will be coming from the layouts that you will be working around. So, concept is not one entity, it is a mixture of all the requirements that you could enhance the overall site conditions and the livability of the design. So, a concept will respond to the site conditions, the typology of the building, the brief given by the users, that means what is the requirement, and ultimately will convert into a program that is required for the design layout. So, a design concept is expressed through materials, technology, the elements and principles of design, innovation and collaboration from different stakeholders. In architecture, design concepts are categorized into two categories. One is a tangible concept and second in the intangible concept. A tangible concept is something which is more apparent based and it's a very direct concept that you are able to see and identify very quickly. A very good example of a tangible concept is a lotus temple that is structured in Delhi. So, lotus temple derives its concept from the flower lotus and represents the Baha'i house of worship. And in the form, students, you can see the lotus form is very apparent from the building structure. Whereas the intangible concept comes from any belief, a psychology, any interpreted value of the overall architecture design. For example, the Virasat-e Khalsa located in Anandpur Sahib is a museum which showcases the Sikh heritage and culture. It does not have any structural demarcation, but it also takes its concept from the learning of the Sikhism. So, how do we implement these concepts in a residential design? So, in a residential design, the concept would be site responsive, it could be climate responsive, it could be user centric, or maybe a spatial organization that dominates the overall design. But learners, always keep in mind that one project will have one dominant concept. You will not have multiple concepts in one design. So, if the concept wants to be site responsive, then the corner plot with a heavy traffic on site, then in that cases the bedrooms would be placed away from the noisy side of the road. If it is climate responsive, then the sun path and the wind orientation shall be taken into care, so that minimal thermal load is added to the building, and it can also be curbed through certain design integration such as a shared veranda or maybe the controlled reception of the fenestrations. Fenestrations are the openings in any building. Elderly bedrooms should be put on ground floor. So, keeping that in mind, the user centric approaches can be also the pivotal point for deciding what types of concept you want to take ahead. It could have common living and dining as a center core, a separate private zone for the younger. So, depending upon the user centric requirement, concept can move around that aspect also. Spatial organization can be another point of concept, like putting the entry, living room, dining and the private spaces in such hierarchy that it comes one after the another and a visual connection is maintained within these spaces, keeping the corridors minimal and keeping the movement integrated with the spaces. So, this is another type of concept which is intangible concept. So, you will not be able to see directly, but when the people live in that space, they feel the concept actually coming into reality. So, design concept is a tool, it is basically a decision making tool. It is not any form, a style or any decoration. Concept is something which will help you take certain decisions when you are working on your design at the later on stages. So, concept will help you decide which space comes first, which spaces should be protected, which spaces should be exposed, where should be the hierarchy of the spaces taken care of, and every planning decision should relate to back of the concept. If it is not relating to the concept, that means the concept is weak or very unclear. So, architectural design concept is basically an idea, first thought resulting from mental awareness and the understanding and the activities of the user and the user requirement. That idea is converted into a concept which brings about a mental image of what is ought to be and what idea is to be generalized for a particular design. That concept gets integrated and changed into a design concept, which is represented graphically by diagrams, plans, single line drawings and other form of graphics or drawings. That design concept then converts into a scheme, an organizational pattern or structure for the design. A layout starts coming up and that leads to the final project scheme for the design, which is presented in form of a working drawing. So, concept translates from an idea to an executionable drawing level interpretation. So, that is the importance of concept, and that how strong the concept, the better the project layout will be. A very good example from architect Frank Lloyd Wright's Fallingwater. It is a very good example of how site conditions are translated into a design concept. It's basically leading an organic architecture relating to the nature, and that nature is converted into the design layout. So this is a very site responsive design where the residence is built directly over a waterfall, and it generates a beautiful overall scenario where design actually is admired and the living condition is also very good for the user. So this is one of the pioneer projects that is there in the residential design, and every student, every learner should know about this design, how an organic design, a nature related design gets interpreted into a physical reality. FLW's Fallingwater is a stark example of that concept. So architecture design concept has a lot of responsive, climate responsive, user centric, spatial organization support, and that concept needs to be converted into zoning, and that zoning needs to be converted into final spatial strategy. So from concept to spatial strategy is the point where the architect's inner creativity gets into the play, where the concept influences each and every decision, such as the location of the entry, where how the spaces are put into the layout, the public relationship and the private relationship of the spaces, meaning thereby where the spaces are located so that public and private relationships are maintained to the utmost, and how much openings you are going to give into the design. So for example, a privacy based concept would be that the zoning would be a very deeper level zoning, where all the private areas such as the bedrooms, the master bedrooms, the library or the study are placed very deep inside the layout. A climate based concept would be such that you are placing courtyards to act as buffers, verandas to act as buffer to stop getting heat into the building, making the walls thicker, protruding the chhajas or the creating louvers. So all these conceptual decisions will help you build the plan, build the design, and help you place the required user needs into the correct location. So at this stage, when you are working on changing the concept from basic understanding and layout to the spatial zoning, at this stage dimensions doesn't play much importance. Most important part is the relationship of these spaces. So zoning comes as a very important aspect, where building size, magnitude, all these things are taken into care. Coming to the zoning in residential design, so it is basically marked by a logical grouping of spaces, where purpose is to have a functional clarity, have a privacy control, and overall smooth circulation movement. So the zoning decisions will follow certain concepts, and the zoning will be done in two aspects. The first aspect is understanding of the site zoning, and the second aspect would be understanding of the floor level zoning. So site level zoning basically where you decide to place which areas, which functional entities are to be located in which part of the site. For example, we just discussed the placement of the noisy, the private zones away from the noisy roads. So placement of these areas on the site is very important, and the concept changing from the basic conceptual level into a design level integration has a very important role to play. From the site zoning, you convert the different areas into a building or the floor level zoning, where you are made to put different aspects of the user needs into the rightful positions. For example, placement of the bedroom right at the entry is not a good solution. So zoning has to be in sync with the concept you have thought, and it has to follow certain guidelines which impact the overall user need and the experiences. So when we start doing zoning in residences, we identify zones in terms of the usability. So there are public zones, semi-public, private zones, service zones, and zones that are interconnected or should be kept isolated. So public zones are basically where you take in your guest, where you allow the guest to come in or any unknown person to come in. So these are basically the foyer areas, the living rooms and the drawing rooms. Semi-public zones are basically the areas where you want only the family and very close people to come into the house. So these are basically the dining areas, the family areas. The private zones are the zones where only the members of the family would have the access to. So these are the bedrooms, the study area and the private areas. Along with these, there are service zones, which are basically the kitchens, the toilets and the utility areas, and the zones which are interconnected but are not isolated. So all these zones, they are interconnected because of the user needs, because the user has to transition from one part to another and make use of the overall houses. So the areas have to be interconnected, they cannot be isolated, and there are few strategies that we would be discussing how these zonings are achieved. So when privacy and gradient are laid into a spatial hierarchy, you can decide a sequence of laying out the spaces. So where to put the entry. So from entry, only the direct public access would be there, which would translate into a semi-private and private zone. So the hierarchy of the spaces would be strongly influenced overall by the layout of the space that you are making. Second important part is the understanding the spatial relationship. Every space doesn't need to be very close or adjacent to each other. Some spaces should be kept separated. For example, the kitchen and the living, which are more active spaces, should be kept a little bit separate from the bedrooms. So spatial relationships decide the convenience, the privacy and the comfort of the overall end user. And to achieve the right adjacency, there is a tool called space matrix or adjacency matrix, and this tool helps you to analyze the relationship between two spaces. So this chart basically has two aspects. One is the horizontal and another is the vertical. In both horizontal and vertical places, you put on the requirements and the spaces that you are going to design, and then you identify the proximity between each of the spaces with other. So you need to understand the required proximity, the functional connection, and what are the incompatibilities. So this stage is used before the drawing of the plans. So kitchen would be closer to the dining space and it will not be very close to the bedroom. So that is why learners, you see a tick mark between the kitchen and the dining cell and a cross between the bedroom and the dining cell. So this tool really helps you understand which spaces should be kept together. And to further understand how these spaces need to be connected with each other, you need to understand the circulation logic. So circulation should be already decided and planned. Circulation is basically the areas which connect two spaces. So primary circulation is the main path or the main movement, and a secondary circulation is something which is the connectivity between the two rooms. It basically gives you the sequence of movement from one place to another. So these hierarchy then gets converted into a bubble diagram stage, which shows zoning and relationship and how these are connected. So bubble diagram will help you understand different types of movement pattern within the spaces and how transition is happening between two level of spaces. The connection of spaces becomes more clearer. So when you are working on actually the layout of that space, so the blocking becomes furthermore easier. So blocking, one is done on the horizontal level and second it is done on the vertical level, where the horizontal organization will help you work out different spaces, how they are interlinking to each other in terms of size and position in a horizontal aspect, and the stacking would be basically the vertical connectivity between the two spaces. So this helps you bridge the gap between the connectivity and the hierarchy of the spaces when you are working on the spatial layout. So bubble diagram and your stacking diagram will work together. and whenever there is an interaction between the spaces or the spaces is being transitions, these are achieved through the areas called lobbies, hallways and visual screens. These are essential to have the privacy and comfort between the users and the spaces. So next step becomes transitioning from zoning diagrams to the single line plans, where final output of the concept gets translated into the zoning. So your bubble diagram will get converted into a single line diagram, where all the spaces have to be put in the rightful position, and it has to be reviewed before the detailed planning. So single line plan is basically the relationship based circulation focused plan, where each and every functional space is planted, placed with the impact of the user need, user requirement, correct circulation, correct hierarchy and the placement of these spaces. So the design basically has the final output in which you will get placement of all the areas at the rightful position. And before going for the detailed design, before going for the detailed layout of the plan, this process will help you understand the relationship between spaces, and you will make that design decision which is final for working on the final drawings and the aspects which are required for future planning. So this is an important stage which has to be taken care of, and many a times common mistakes happen at this stage, where you do zoning without having a concept, without understanding, jumping up to the dimensioning part too early. I understand that dimensioning is important because area formulation, area planning is also an important part of a residential design, but ignoring a circulation logic, not understanding the spatial hierarchy, not keeping the user need and requirement into the correct hierarchy, it will impact the overall design layout. You cannot treat the bubble diagram as a final plan. So these have to be in sync with the logic of designing and planning, and putting the user requirements such as the bedrooms, the drawing rooms, the living rooms, the service areas such as kitchen, washrooms, the toilets and the laundry areas into the rightful position. So during the design aspect, when we are talking about transitioning from a basic concept to the spatial layout, it is important to understand that concept will give you a basic understanding of the design that you are going to make. Zoning will help you decide the spatial hierarchy and the privacy. So private, public, semi-public, semi-private, the service areas have to be put into the accordance of spatial hierarchy and the privacy requirement. For example, the washrooms to the bedroom should not open up to a drawing room area where multiple people are going to use that space. So bubble and adjacency diagram will help you understand to where how the placement of these spaces should work around. So agency matrix or the space matrix will help you give the understanding of placing which area closer to which area, and which area should be kept afar from which spaces. So strong schematic diagrams, strong schematic plans will lead to a better floor plan and a better design. Ultimately, as architects and designers, our aim is to have a plan, have a design which is user centric and helps the user centric approach, and it is comfortable for the end user. And once we work on the from the bubble diagram to the single line plan, next steps become the double line plan, where we work on the detailing and addition of each space with another space. So the key takeaways from this session would be for the learners to understand the importance of concept, the importance of zoning, the importance of bubble diagram, the importance of adjacency diagrams, and prevent any planning errors that would come on, because this is the stage of reiteration from designing one part to again going back depending upon the requirement. So, it is a to and fro process, and a bubble diagram cannot be translated into a design solution. A bubble diagram will help you work out what are the zoning requirements, where the spaces have to be kept, and then the layout works on which you get in form of single line plan. The single line plan helps to understand and become a strong schematic plans which will lead to better floor plans. So, we will be discussing detailed floor planning in the upcoming lectures. So, for now students, we are going to conclude these lectures with key takeaways that concept will lead to zoning, zoning will lead to bubble diagrams will lead to schematic plans, and the schematic plans would get converted into floor plans and site plans, starting from the site planning level to the floor planning. Floor plans will have ground floor plans, first floor, second floor, depending upon how much area you are working with, the overall planning will work around it. So, in our next lecture, we are going to discuss about how individually each rooms are designed, how spaces are designed for utmost user centric approach, and it will help you to understand how designing works into the depth of integration of these spaces. So, thank you learners, see you in the next lecture.